Our guest today is Helena Kennedy. She's best known as being one of the country's leading lawyers and defender of human rights. But over the years, she's made a major contribution to education, authoring a number of reports and sitting on a number of very important commissions. Helena, thank you for joining us today. You're of that generation that's the first in your family to go to university. Why was it that it was you who managed to get to university when your parents, grandparents didn't?
Well, first of all, I went into higher education, but I didn't go to university. I went straight to the Council of Legal Education, which you could do in those days, to study law. But it was a huge departure for one of us to be going on to higher education. I had two older sisters who were 9 and 10 years older than I was, and one younger sister. And those two older sisters just missed out. You know, they were born during the war and left school at 15. And I was the one who was lucky, who was born at that moment where so many more people got that chance. But we were brought up in a household which valued education. My parents saw education as one of those great things that was part of the vision, the post-war vision for working class families. They wanted to have stable jobs, they wanted to have houses with bathrooms, and they wanted their kids to get an education.
Did you ever think of going into teaching?
I did. I mean, that was what my mother wanted. So there was certainly, that was seen as the great thing to do, particularly as a woman. But I became interested at school. I was encouraged. I had great teachers, and I became very interested in debating. And
which the Scottish system is particularly good at, to tell you the truth.
It is. I mean, I'm sure it's why there's so many Scottish politicians.
You went into law, but you kept this interest in education running, and throughout your whole of your career, it's almost as though you've always been practicing law, but contributing to the education debate as well. Just wanted to touch on the reports that you'd been involved with and the work that you've done. And 97, I think it was the report into further education. Yeah. And I was wondering, sort of 10 years on, say a little bit about how you think that's gone, whether we're stronger in further education now, whether we're getting as much out of that system as we ought to do.
Learning Works actually came out of a period of work looking at the further education system. And one of the things that was very clear to me was that so often the people who ended up before the courts had missed out in education, who breathed in failure at an early stage. And so second chance education is absolutely vital. And while further education provides, you know, often it's terrific sixth form education straight from people who just don't want to be at the sixth form in a school. It provides many different, facets of education. But one of the most precious things it does is provide a way back in to education.
And they're very much community-based as well, which it's easier to get back to a college, isn't it? The foundation you set up was very much the same lines for second chance people going back to learning, perhaps people who'd missed out the first time round. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what happened was, after the Learning Works report came out, there was sort of, one of the things that I was very concerned about was that the student, the person who went into further education, talented, and very often there would be people who would have aspiration to use that to go into university, but who couldn't because they were frightened, the possibility of debt, and just that little bit of extra money was going to make a difference. I mean, basically, this was about working with wonderful people in further education, who are actually the backbone of this, the colleges, where they would identify the students, they help me.
What's your view now about the work that's being done to broaden access into higher education? But now we do have fees. Equally, we have lots of initiatives that are meant to widen education. How well do you think we're doing?
Well, I mean, the headway has been phenomenal by comparison with what had gone on in the past. So there's been a great leap forward, but there's still an awful lot of work to do, as you yourself know. And it's about providing the right kind of support. I mean, we really need to recognise that there are some people who have faced so many problems in life that, in fact, to go into the daunting experience of higher education, that they really do need additional support.
On a weekly basis, you must be defending young people, not so young people, in front of the courts, serious charges, who presumably have rarely had a really good experience in schools. Is that fair comment about the youngsters who come before the courts?
If you examine the people who end up coming before the courts, by and large, you'll find a huge number of them are people who have not fared well in the education system. And often it's about multiple social problems. There are real questions here that have to be addressed, and I've seen it. And I just think that, I often will represent really clever, smart boys who've got themselves into serious trouble, and you take it back and you hear their story and you really sort of chew the fat with them, and you know that in fact all that kind of, if you like, corrupted talent, which has ended up in crime, could have been channeled into fabulous things. They could have been in the city and making tons of money legitimately.
Right, that's right. I know, and I used to teach, used to say they were streetwise. They wouldn't behave in class and you couldn't get them to do anything, but they really could survive in the world outside school.
And one of the other things that we're only getting to grips with is that lots of those boys in classes, and I'm saying boys particularly, adolescent boys who give teachers a bad time, it's often because they are disguising the fact that actually they've got dyslexia or problems where they never got the learning of to read in their pocket properly the first time round. And so they try to hide their deficit because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of everybody else in the class. And so they act up, they get themselves chucked out, they get themselves, reported, all that sort of stuff. And often it's to cover up their own feelings of shame because they can't do what other people in the class can.
When you see these young people for whom school has failed and there's no getting away from that, presumably it's not just school, it's home circumstances as well. And there is that battle sometimes. The danger is that the school blames the home and the home blames the school. And somehow it's that interplay, isn't it, of lack of learning culture at home and lack of, presumably, effective teaching at school.
Yeah. I mean, it often, if people have themselves had a bad experience about school, then of course that's how it will be talked about at home. I mean, for the most part, they want their kids to get a handle on it and to be part of it and to do well in it. But what we have to do is recognise all the talents, and that I think we're still not good at. We still do the sheep and goats thing, and we don't. And I don't think have enough space for people to gain confidence in dance, through music, through the arts, through all sorts of other ways, through sport, which can then, once the confidence is there, feed back into other forms of learning.
Another area I think that would come into that category is the debate about what we do between 14 and 19. I mean, when you're doing the reports that you've done, when you were looking at FE, did you find yourself thinking the curriculum we teach in schools is not going to do enough for all our children?
Oh, absolutely. I certainly think that by the time boys are 14, I mean, and this is true of some girls too, often what they want to be doing is things that are actually much more practical. They actually do want to be getting in there and seeing what the world of work is more like. And so I like the fact that there is a level of development now of notions that you can actually have time out.
I was thinking, when you're talking about the youngsters who you might see in the court situation, you have seen over the years, we're not very good, are we, at that point of linking them back into education? Prison education has probably, put it bluntly, not been the strongest part of our education.
How can we imagine or pretend or create a fiction that we're doing that well with the numbers that are going into prison? And we now are up, I mean, to our shame, are up there at the top of the league tables in Europe.
Especially with young people.
And especially with young people, jailing more people. And I have to tell you that I'm not a happy woman around the ASBO situation, because I think that we're actually, accelerating people's progress into prisons. And once a young person is lumbered with the fact that they've been to prison, it's very, very hard for life to take a better turn.
I wanted to go into the Power Report because it really has touched into something, I think, which is linked into schools, but it's linked into the notion of community and everything we are and democracy, what we are as a nation. It's this sort of lack of ability to engage our young people in the political process we've got, or more the other way around, the lack of ability of the political process to engage with young people.
That's right.
When you looked at the evidence, I mean, you had views before you started the Power Report. Were you surprised about the lack of engagement of the evidence you got?
I really was. There were a number of things that were quite shocking. I mean, one, we knew that young people were not voting before we embarked on this. I mean, that was something that I knew. And lots of politicians will say to you, well, of course, that's not so surprising, and lots of people might not do that. But once they start paying taxes and once they've got kids of their own, then they kind of, get the jolt and they start going to the ballot box. It's not true.
No, it's not true.
And that's the great shocking thing that's very different from previous generations, is that young people now not acquiring a habit of democracy. And it was very interesting. We went to schools, we went to sixth form college, we went to further education college, and we just went to sports stadiums. community centres where there were the kids had sort of, snooker tables and things. And we just say to people, "Will you think of voting, or did you vote at the last election? How old are you?" And it was very interesting because they were political. They had a view on, particularly around rich and poor. They feel very strongly about an unfair world. And yet they don't feel anywhere that they can channel in all that stuff.
Do you have to learn to be a citizen in a democracy? What's the role of schools in this, do you think, about really accepting that part of their job is to educate children for democracy and to be active participants in it?
Well, one of the things that was interesting was that that when we spoke to kids in schools and adolescents and teenagers and at different stages in their thing, they felt there wasn't an awful lot of democracy inside the schools. Opportunities for them to have a view and to put it forward and to be listened to. So the political system in some ways reflected what they felt happened in their own schools. So I say this to teachers, that actually it's not good enough just to talk about it, you actually have to find ways in which they can exercise a bit of power themselves, because that democracy is about power and managing power. But the other thing was that you have to make space where people can express their views. And I think teachers have a very important role in all of that. But teachers at the moment are feeling fearful because they feel that, if they're seen to be in any way themselves political in schools, then of course they're jumped on from on high. They also haven't got an awful lot of time to be doing this stuff.
I think that's another thing as well. The timetable now is genuinely so crowded and so much is demanded that if you're teaching a young boy or a young girl to argue well and debate well, I think teachers often feel that that's not recognised anywhere in the accountability system.
I definitely think you have to make those spaces, create spaces and recognise that citizenship is about asking the democratic why. It's about a degree of scepticism. You have to develop that. If people want to know, how does it work? Why should I believe that?
I suppose progress has been made. Citizenship has now become a subject on the curriculum. Should it be examined? Should everybody have to have a GCSE in citizenship before you leave school? Would it make a difference?
I don't know about whether you make it a GCSE, but I certainly feel that business of just knowing how the system works. Somebody said to me, a young woman said to me the other day, that she didn't know that we had a first past the post system, and could I explain that to her?
Yes.
And so, quite basic things are pass people by. And so I think it's important that we just give people those ways in to understanding the system.
It's a language you need to engage in democracy.
Impenetrable,
to some extent. I wanted to just finish by asking you really, sort of, if you look at this generation of young people, how confident are you about what our world will be like when they are adults and take over? So how solvable are some of the issues we've been talking about today, and how confident are you that this generation of young people can crack it? Yeah, well, you see, I of course, I'm an optimist. I'm a kind of cup half full person, and I go to schools a lot, and I go to prize givings, and I go to talk about law and so on, and I believe that actually our new generation are going to be really the people who'll make the difference. That particularly on the environment, they know this is urgent, and they think we've failed them, and they're going to feel that about war, and they're going to feel that about a lot of those big subjects, and I feel confident that they are actually going to revisit this because they feel that the grown-ups let them down. I think every generation feels that, and I think that's probably right. Helena, thank you very much indeed.